This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
If you're looking for evidence that a lost civilization somehow reemerged after the end of the last ice age, I'll bet you wouldn't start looking here in North America or South America either. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert, joining me for a monthly Iron and Myth Roundtable as we tackle Season 2 of a program that's very well done. We hand it to him, Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse. Season 2 is now out. You can binge watch it on Netflix, and we are going to discuss that. And joining me to, kind of take it apart, criticize what we feel needs and praise that which is praiseworthy. The author of Giants, Sons of the Gods, now available in a 10th anniversary revised and expanded edition, among other books. We'll talk about some of his new projects coming up toward the end of the program. Also, the pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado in Boulder, host of the Giant Steps podcast with our good friend Rudy Landa, Doug Van Dorn, the best-selling author and award-winning screenwriter of such things as Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Watchers, Chronicles of the Apocalypse, the theological thriller Cruel Logic. See, I take 6 weeks off and I need to be retrained. And his brand new novel, just available, Judah Maccabee Part 1, The Abomination of Desolation, Brian Godawa, and the director of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, author of Interview with the Giant, Ethno-Historical Notes on the Nephilim, and the Nephilim Dossier, Dr. Judd Burton. Fellas, before we dive into Season 2 of Graham Hancock's series, Ancient Apocalypse, I want to take a moment, since we're going to launch this on the 22nd of December, just ahead of Christmas. There is a little boy who's been following this program for almost a couple of years now, and he is making great strides in his progress. People who wonder why I say goodnight, Ollie or Oliver, wherever you are at the end of each program, it is for this little boy who has been following us and really appreciates these programs. He's getting very excited because it is just about Christmas time in the Todd household. So, guys, if you wouldn't mind just wishing a Merry Christmas to Ollie, I know that he would appreciate it. And Ollie, we thank you for watching. So Merry Christmas, Ollie. Fellas.
Merry Christmas, Ollie. Merry Christmas, buddy.
And Ollie, just be good to your brother Theo, okay? And be good for your mom and dad. All right. So Season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, out and available for streaming on Netflix. This was interesting homework this week as I watched through the episodes and took notes. Any overarching thoughts? Judd, I know you and I exchanged a couple of notes here this past week. What were your overall impression of Season 2, in which Graham Hancock focuses on the Americas?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, the production values, I mean, it's a top-notch production, visually stunning. I thought it was well written. Graham, I return to the point that I've made always about Hancock's work, and that he asks very important questions. He's asking a lot of the right questions. I was impressed by the scope of the new work that's been done in the Americas that he covered, like the finds in New Mexico at White Sands. And also the finds in South America and the Amazon. You know, it makes me think. Percy Fawcett, one of the explorers of the Amazon, kind of in the heyday of archaeology and exploration, was convinced that there were these sophisticated civilizations within the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest itself. And now, thanks to LiDAR and more comprehensive survey techniques, we now know that there's evidence, in fact, abundant evidence for that. And so he's sort of posthumously vindicated, when he had basically all of the Royal Geographic Society in his day poo-pooing the idea that they were there. So I have to give it to Graham that he he's really good at that anyway. He's really good about integrating, the latest archaeological finds. Of course, Graham is not looking at this material through the biblical lens, so he's very close. He's looking at much of the same material that all of us, in this field are, but he has discounted the biblical perspective in large part. And that may have something to do with his activities outside of investigative journalism and archaeological journalism. But we'll get into that tonight,
yes,
too, I'm sure. Yeah, has nothing to do with that sort of thing.
Yeah. Brian is one who's got experience writing script for film. Not exactly the same as writing a docuseries, but the pacing of the series seemed to be very, very good. He moves from one site to another, did a really good job teasing at the end of one episode, leading into the next one. What were your thoughts about this season?
Yeah, well, the filmmaking was good, in terms of documentary. Interesting, helpful in terms of what I like about what he's doing is he's making archaeological information that would not otherwise become known because most people are not interested in this kind of stuff. It's boring to them. Now, that's a statement more about, I think, most people than it is the material. But I'm grateful that his celebrity does that. There's a lot of downsides to it. And for myself included, because I'm not one of these guys I don't tend to follow this kind of stuff. So it's fascinating to find this information. As a Christian, I found some of his thoughts more in line with ours, but of course, many that were not. And so what I like about him is he's good to play against the secular archaeological crowd who also have their own elitist biases. But of course, as you're watching it, you have to really be aware of the problem with documentaries, specifically in today's day and age. I mean, this has always been a problem, but I mean specifically, it's gotten more so. There's no such thing as documentaries anymore. There's only docuganda, which is sort of propaganda done in documentary format. And that's not inherently bad. I mean, I've been involved in some material like that myself. But the point is that he's only exclusively showing this one viewpoint of his, and he'll occasionally throw out a little, differing viewpoint and then, crush it, but it's not really, there's so much left out from other viewpoints, particularly because he's dealing with mysteries, right? So all the more you really would have the obligation in one sense, if you're a true documentarian, is to really explore all, show these many possible interpretations. And I don't know if I'd fault him for only doing his own viewpoint, but we have to be aware that you're watching propaganda as you're doing this. And I really highly recommend doing something that I did as well in preparation for this, which was I refreshed up actually, and there was no archaeologist who analyzed this second season, but there were a couple that did the first season. We're talking genuine archaeologists. Mm-hmm. And one of them's Flint Dibble. Another one is this Stefan Milo. And another one is this Milo. I forgot his last name, but he does this Mini Minuteman series. And he analyzes. Mini Minuteman, yeah. Yeah. And of course, they have their own biases. And I like that because my point is exposing yourself to all the sides, you get to see all their biases and play them against each other as you seek to find, your pathway of understanding. But it was very helpful to me because the way that Hancock presents it, it's very dramatic. And it's like the mysteries, and he uses the language. This is an utterly unprecedented, fantastical, all this language, which, we all use that kind of emotional language. But then when you hear the archaeologists explaining, well, actually, hunter-gatherers actually were involved in building cities and such. So it's really not a mystery, It's important for you to be able to see the explanations of some of these so-called mysteries that he's providing are not that mysterious. but it doesn't change the fact that, these ages and stuff are now changing our understanding, sure, and placing dates back further. That's fine. But that was very helpful for me because I could also see the biases in the archaeologists as well. But it was interesting because they're young guys, they're not old guys, and they're tech savvy. And so I think they are doing a good job in trying to make archaeology more interesting and worthy and exciting as well. So that's what I would recommend, watching the series and then watching those critiques, not to give the answers, but to say, oh, okay, here's a different perspective that helps clarify some of those mysteries. But then also, but they have their own bias as well. So that's where I found myself playing them against each other, particularly when it comes to this motif that we've addressed. The singular thing I'm most interested in is this motif of the myth of the Apkallu, the wise men from the sea. I understand the mythological context of that, but there's something that's very common about that does transcend, I think, the various cultures and requires a little bit more of an answer than the very dismissal. The problem with the archaeologists is they tend to be dismissive of all mythology as if it's irrelevant. And so that, that was kind of my overall impression. This season was not as interesting to me as the first, but it was still, like I said, from just archaeological viewpoint, I would love to go see some of these places just to see them because they're so amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Doug, I know that some of the work that Hancock was exposing or sharing in this season is something that you and Judd have been working on with sites over on the Golan Heights. The Serpent Ridge there at Gilgal Rephaim, and that is something that seems to show up again and again in some of these sites around the world. What was your take on how that information was presented here in as far as the sites that he featured in North and South America?
So I've been following Graham really almost since the beginning, I suppose. I came across his Fingerprints of the Gods back in like 96. I think it came out in 94 or something. He said he's been doing this for 30 years. So, I wasn't surprised. He came out with a book, America Before, The Key to Earth's Lost Civilization, back in 2019. And I think there's a lot of stuff that's going on from that book. And when I first picked up that book several years ago when it came out, I saw the Serpent Mound as the very first thing that he talks about in that book. So, of course, I'm like super interested in it, right? So I wasn't really caught by surprise by any of the stuff that he was talking about. Something kind of struck me with what Brian was saying. We're all kind of older guys, and we grew up in the worldview that is not Graham Hancock, like at all. And I thought it was interesting they had Keanu Reeves kind of being the guy who began and then ended the show. Mm-hmm. And he's right around our same age. And so he represents the worldview that we came out of, and that's really kind of disintegrating in a lot of different ways around us. And there's this whole generation of kids that are now, some of them, I suppose, this is all they've ever heard is Graham Hancock sort of stuff. And that just really blows me away. So Brian's point about propaganda is, I just kind of want to reinforce that. And I also don't think that propaganda is a necessarily bad thing. But that is what Graham is doing, and he has an agenda to promote his view. And for right or wrong, it is what it is. But people really do need to be aware that that's what's going on when they watch his shows, just so that they can keep themselves from being brainwashed without them realizing that that's what's happening to them, Well, we want to be thinking about what we're hearing. And a lot of the things that we've all said this before, we probably said it last time when we were dealing with him, Graham asks great questions. But Graham is also, I don't know if any of you guys saw the debate with, I forget their last names, but the Wes guy who's the Christian apologist, and then Billy.
Wes Huff?
Yeah.
Billy Carson.
Billy Carson. And Billy was on, Rogan just like a month or two ago. And really, I was really surprised by one thing, because he reminds me a lot of Graham Hancock, Billy does. His worldview, the way that he presents himself, And when you saw Wes kind of just completely dismantle this guy in every possible way, and he did it with kindness, and he did it with facts and
really
patience, and to see the way Billy responded to that, like I think that that's probably what would happen with Graham, unfortunately, because the man does not like Christianity. And we need to keep that in the forefront of our mind. Like, you can ask great questions and even come to some of the right answers, but for the wrong reasons or for the wrong, that kind of stuff. And that just, it comes to my mind every time I watch Graham Hancock. It really came to my mind. Maybe it's a transition for you, Derek, for where you want to lead it, but I noticed this first with him. So he had a documentary series that he put out in the late 90s on video cassette tape when he was talking about his fingerprint stuff. And you saw a different Graham Hancock. And I was listening to Coast one night. This was maybe 2010 or something. He had come out with his book on supernatural, where he goes into his ayahuasca stuff. And I'm telling you, this dude was a different man, and not in a good way. Like, something happened to him. I don't get that feeling of the tone that he came across when it was that fresh with him in watching these 2 seasons. But thinking about the way Billy has responded to Wes, like suing him and doing all this crazy stuff, it just irrational, almost demonic sort of stuff, wouldn't surprise me. And we're dealing with some really crazy, dark stuff, in my opinion, especially with the studies that we've been doing with Leviathan and the Serpent Mound and the worship of the serpent and the Watchers. And this is dark stuff. And Graham doesn't understand what he's getting himself involved in. So those are just some of the thoughts that I've had.
Yeah, and I think you all raise good points, that we need to appreciate that there's a specific worldview that's being put forward in these documentaries that he's put forward. Just as, when Sharon and I, for example, put together a video showing our tour of Israel and the sites that we see, of course, we're going to have a biblical worldview, and we make no apologies for it. If somebody asks, well, why didn't you show another view? Well, let somebody else make that video. So
exactly.
Sharon,
and that's fair.
Made a really good comment and said, Graham Hancock has made 2 seasons of the kind of documentary that she would love to have made, but from a Christian perspective. And I think there's, if there's somebody listening out there who's got the energy, the physicality, and the resources to do it, I think this would be a really wonderful thing.
Derek, can I just butt in just to help fill that out? The thing about filmmaking and propaganda is it's totally, when you're making films and documentaries, people have to realize they're millions and millions of dollars. Well, his was, right? Yeah, but even us little guys, if we go to make a documentary, maybe we can squash together 10,000 or whatever it is we need to fly around or do what we need, right? And so the point is that it's very expensive to do these things. Right. And so in point of fact, it's like, I'm going to promote my view first, and I don't have time to cover all other views.
Yeah.
Now, where multiple views are more appropriate would be for things that are more like academic or scholarly. I don't even know if those exist anymore, but, I want to say PBS, but I can't, because that's docuganda too. But, I'm saying, though, at least like there is a place for that. But in today's world, it's so expensive to make a movie that I don't blame someone for not being fair, showing both sides. But just like Doug was saying, just be aware that's what this is.
It, right. It's not, none of us are critical, I don't think, of Graham just because he's doing that. But we want people to understand that that is, in fact, what's happening.
On my advertisements for my books on Facebook, of course, you do a book advertisement, and it's like a post, and people can comment. And people start engaging in debates, and I delete the debates and they go, "Hey, how come you're deleting my stuff? You're censoring me." And I'm like, "No, this is an ad promoting my books, not your debate, right?"
Right.
And I have no shame. I have no conscience problem with that, because that's the point. I'm paying money to promote my books, to sell books, because I'm promoting my view, not your view. And I tell people, if you want to debate with me, go on to my my Facebook page, and I'll be gladly debate with you, but not here.
Yeah. No, and that's so. I think to make clear to people watching, we're not criticizing Graham Hancock for making these programs. Just there's an aspect to which aspect of the answers. He's asking great questions, as you said, Doug, but he has a blind spot when it comes to the answers, and we will get into some of this as we talk about it. I mean, episode 1, he starts out with something that Sharon and I were very interested in, for her especially, because her father was based at White Sands, New Mexico, back after World War II. After he got back from the war, he spent some time working down there at White Sands. And according to, and let me also clarify to folks, we're not saying that Hancock is misrepresenting the finds of the archaeologists either. So I think he's presenting their work and letting them speak rather than putting words in their mouths. So to that end, I think he's done an excellent job. But finding human footprints that are, according to what the representative for the National Park Service, I think that he was escorting him around, perhaps more than 20, almost 23,000 years old, which is long before the standard narrative has people crossing the ice bridge from Asia, from Siberia into Alaska, and then coming down after the last ice age. So this suggests that the narrative, and kind of sets the tone for a lot of his work, that the history that we've been taught is fundamentally flawed because the timeline is all wrong.
Yeah, let's remember that Graham's fundamental premise is that there was a lost civilization that we've completely forgotten about, that goes back to what 12,000 years ago, or whatever the number is, 9,600 BC or something. So every single thing that he is doing is driving at that thesis. And, in some ways, he's the enemy of my enemy, because he's trying to overthrow a worldview that I think all of us would say, yeah, it needs to be overthrown. And he's on the right track, we think, in a lot of ways. But every single thing that he's doing is being driven towards pushing that thesis.
Excellent point.
The discovery, Judd, you mentioned, of the evidence of a civilization that existed in South America, in the Amazon, which I think most of us just assumed has always been sort of this vast rainforest with tribal folks living along the rivers there. Turns out when you start using LIDAR to look underneath the canopy, you find evidence that there were these massive cities that existed throughout Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador, which is astonishing. I guess we assume that because it's rainforest now, it's always been rainforest. That turns out not to be the case. But then he, again, starts connecting dots. And this is the dots that I'm not sure necessarily connect. That because the geometric shapes that were found there, like big squares underneath the rainforest canopy, are similar to geometric shapes that have been found in other parts of the world. That somehow they must have been inspired by the same lost civilization at the end of the last ice age. Now, maybe there's some truth to that, but I think it's worth asking, maybe it's just because there were only a limited number of geometric shapes from which to draw: circle, triangle, square, trapezoid, whatever. But it is interesting, though, that when you looked at some of the strata at some of these locations, that the organic material there suggests that some of these sites may have been occupied as far back as the end of the last ice age, or the end of the Younger Dryas, which is the period that he mentions. So is that a valid connection for him to make, that because we found evidence of civilization where there was none believed to be there, does it automatically follow that this was the result of a lost ice age civilization that came back and restored civilization in parts of the world where we didn't think it existed at that point in history?
Not necessarily. I mean, a lot of archaeology is highly interpretive, particularly the farther back you go, and we're dealing with prehistoric, remains here for the most part. So there's nothing written to go off of. I know that one of sort of the skeleton key to all of this, all of the similarity here that Hancock is driving at, as Doug pointed out, he links to geometric patterns that people often see in their DMT trips, whatever the psychedelics happen to be, whether that's ayahuasca or peyote, or I think he talked about the coyote tobacco in the Four Corners region. Datura, there's any number of hallucinogens around the world that could produce those effects. But the same kind of argument, or rather the argument for that sort of similarity, for instance, in rock art patterns, around the same latitudes around that world, people puzzled over too. And I've heard the DMT thesis applied to that as well. But if there's anything to the very bizarre solar activity that's happening during the Younger Dryas cataclysm, where you've got all of this solar radiation that's bombarding the Earth because of the coronal mass ejections. Some of it even making it to the surface because we have records of the rock vitrification on these levels, these stratigraphic levels. But the more compelling argument in that respect for me would have been the sort of aurora effects that would have been produced at lower latitudes by these coronal mass ejections. And the plasma patterns are all very similar, and they can be seen in rock art across the continents in those latitudes that date back to that time frame. But those are more complex patterns than just simple geometric patterns. They are multiple geometric patterns. But I don't know that I completely am sold on Hancock's position when it comes to that, particularly because he's linking it to some sort of message that was given by the taking of DMT. But I mean, considering that part of what the Watchers taught humanity involved plants and arguably hallucinogenic plants, there may be something to that. But again, it's hard to tell because even with the newness and the novelty of all these discoveries that we're making, we still don't have enough data to answer a question like that. I think we're really more on the hermeneutic end, archaeologically speaking, at this point.
Go ahead, Doug.
I used to think that his whole thing to go off in ayahuasca was just kind of a weird, I don't know, nothing to do with his whole quest for the lost civilization, and I'm kind of changing my mind on that, and I don't know that it's necessarily because of Graham. I was doing a little bit of study for our book this week, my book, and I went back to the first Enoch chapter 8, where it talks about these watchers that teach us stuff that Judd just mentioned. Now there's actually at least two traditions in First Enoch that do this. There's one in chapter 69 that's in a totally different book from the Book of the Watchers. But just sticking with chapter 8 for a minute, I wanted to get your guys' take and thoughts on this, because he brings up, and I think rightly so, the Viracocha, Kukulkan, and then he goes across the ocean to Osiris and Hermes with the Greeks, as kind of all the same sort of an idea of a cultural bringer or whatever. And I was reading through, this is Charlesworth's edition of First Enoch, and verse 3, because it's the one that most fits what we're talking about. And this is what it says. Amasrus taught incantation and the cutting of roots, and Armaros the resolving of incantations. And then it talks about other guys. But those are the two that are so interesting to me. When I went over to Nicholsberg's commentary, who also gives a translation of this, he has two completely different names. This is what it says. Shemiyaza taught spells and the cutting of roots, as opposed to Amos-Ras. And Hermione taught sorcery for the loosing of spells and magic and skill. And it seems to me that it's almost like you have something that the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Mesoamericans are putting into one character. Enoch is putting it into two. You've got Shemiyaza, and then you've got Hermione. And of course, Shemiyaza would be a pre-flood fellow, and Hermes would be, and I think that's where that is, Hermione and Hermes would be a post-flood guy. And the thing that was the most interesting to me about this is that the Hermione, the name in the other translation is Armoros. And when you go and you look at Nicholsburg's notes, you find that this is a word that's coming from pharmakia. Okay, so you have in this, you have it all right there. You have the teaching of these things to humanity, and the spells and the roots and the pharmakia, the sorcery, is all part and parcel of it. And then, of course, you get the Jewish take on this, which is very different than what Grandma's going to give, which is that this is an evil thing that the fallen watchers taught humanity. And, of course, you're never going to hear anything about that from Graham Hancock.
Yeah.
You remember, Doug, when we were with Dr. Mike Freakman at Gilgal Rephaim and at the Serpent Mountain, he was talking about the fact that spiral shape, which is found in the petroglyphs in the Four Corners region, is also found all over the world. And he speculated that it was because this was something that may occur during these visions when a shaman would go into a place like Gilgal Rephaim, where that central core would have been pitch dark, except on the summer solstice when the sun would shine through that roof box leading into the central core.
Well, and if I could interject, those could also be sun daggers, because in the Four Corners region, like in fact at Chaco Canyon, which is covered in the series, which is in northwestern New Mexico, there are a number of these spiral patterns, and they're placed usually so that a shadow is cast on them from the sun at certain times of the year. So it may be that a similar kind of effect is at play in the ones, and I can't remember.
One of the reasons that Sharon and I included a chapter on DMT in our new book, The Gates of Hell, was because our argument, or the case that we try to build in the book, is that people have been trying to communicate with entities on the far side of those gates since prehistory. Gilgal Rephaim would fall into that category, according to Dr. Freakman, about 3700 BC, so much younger than the younger Dryas, but still a place where a shaman might have gone and taken part, taken some sort of perhaps an alcohol or something that would open his perceptions to the spirit realm. But certainly in South America, he tried to make the case in one of the episodes that I think episode 4, where he was talking about even though we've only got physical evidence of this practice going back a couple thousand years, it may go back much, much farther than that, because of the way you've got to make it. It is through the combination of the leaf of one plant and the woody stem of another that allows the dimethyltryptamine, the DMT, to be absorbed through the stomach, because normally that would be absorbed or destroyed in the digestive process. So, since we don't know how it was done, it must be science, and perhaps that was left from this hypothesized Ice Age civilization or pre-Ice Age civilization, where this sort of thing was brought to civilizations all around the world. But again, one of some of the most recent research into the use of DMT by Dr. Rick Strassman discovered that there would be volunteers, and I think this was at New Mexico State, where people who were being dosed with it was intravenously, so they didn't have to try to drink this nasty brew and then keep their lunch down as part of the experiment. They were seeing the same things at the same time. And given that mass hallucination is not a real thing, it was more likely that, and this is what Dr. Strassman concluded, that people were seeing the same thing in another dimension or another realm. So this may be something that goes back, and who knows, maybe Graham Hancock is right. This may go back many, many more thousands of years than the physical evidence that's been found so far.
Sure. And I mean, every ancient culture, Babylonian, Mesopotamian, Canaanite, they all did hallucinogenic drugs. So, there's no problem with that from our perspective. But I got to tell you something, like, of all you guys, I probably know the least about this material, and on all the levels, Graham Hancock and you guys have done a lot of looking into the serpent mounds and the archaeology and stuff. Even though I do find it fascinating, it hasn't drawn me as much as other stuff. So I'm watching this and I'm feeling like I'm closer to a normal person watching it, And, but I got to tell you, because of my filmmaking background, my storytelling background, Doug, as a matter of fact, you are spot on in terms of the structure of the storytelling that is being used. If you follow the structure of the series, of the season, the 3/4 point is usually where you have the climactic moment for the hero to overcome, and to he comes back from death, or he has the inner revelation that allows him to have vanquished the outer enemy, basically. So your climax of your story is your most important point. And of course, that's exactly where the ayahuasca comes in the series. 4, right. And so I'm watching it, and to me, it came out of the blue. But I'm also coming at from more of a, since I also know less about the ayahuasca than you guys do, but I saw it from a worldview standpoint, which was very striking to me, that here you have a guy, and the general tenor of this whole thing is, he's kind of debunking the ancient alien myth. Now, the ancient alien myth is, I don't know if did he used to believe in the ancient aliens, or?
I don't know.
It's always been human agency.
Okay. But so he's trafficked in that world, but he's making the argument for more of human agency, right? That's cool. But like the thing is so the ancient alien thing is clearly the inner yearning for God. It is man who does not want to worship the living God. They worship science, and aliens are the transcendent substitute for God, because it does place our meaning and purpose outside of us, something bigger and higher. Of course, logically and rationally, if you think it through, it's just displacing our humanity or our createdness one level back. So there is no real true transcendence, but it makes sense. And I think that this show represents his search for transcendence, for meaning, because in his story that he's telling, it ultimately is very unsatisfying, because it's like, you're trying to make this point of, all these amazing mysteries. Where did they come from? Well, they came from a more intelligent civilization. But it's just displacing it and keeping it within humanity. It doesn't give any answers or meaning or purpose to life. And I think that he senses that. And it's the same humanistic problem that evolution has, where there's no meaning, no purpose, and all these facts that are really, in the end, boring unless you can storify them into some transcendent story. Well, this is where the ayahuasca comes in. Through the ayahuasca, apparently, it looks like he's found this transcendence that gives him something beyond this materialistic paradigm. He's promoting a materialistic paradigm, but it's not satisfying to him. You can see it in the way he's telling the story. He's yearning for something transcendent. Of course, this is my argument as a Christian in general for all storytelling. They're yearning for that transcendent, but they don't want God to be the transcendent. So he's found something that gives him that experiential sense of transcendence, and it displaces God satisfactorily for him and probably for a lot of people. But it also plays into the demonic world, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that was my impression as I'm watching this.
That's a really, really good observation. And you're right. It's exactly 2/3 of the way through the episode, through the series. And because he doesn't go where Dr. Rick Strassman went after his research, because Strassman, he wrote a book that sold a lot, DMT, the spirit molecule. Because of the reports of the volunteers in his research, and I interviewed him probably 13, 14 years ago on this podcast, he changed his worldview. He was raised by Orthodox Jewish parents. He rejected their worldview, became an atheist for a while, then went into Eastern mysticism and became a Buddhist. And the goal there is to achieve nirvana, which is oneness with everything, or one-ism, if you want to call it that. It's a one-ist religion. Your goal is to merge with everything else. Well, Christianity obviously is not a one-ist religion. We never read anywhere in the Bible that our ultimate goal is to lose our sense of self and become one with everybody else. But he thought that's what he was going to find when these people were on DMT and seeing into that other realm. And instead, he was getting reports of people who were encountering these entities who were generally, at best, ambivalent to their presence in the spirit realm and were often very openly hostile. I mean, some of the accounts were really horrific. One guy reporting that he was physically assaulted in a very humiliating way by a crocodilian or a reptilian, if you want to use that term. So because of this, Dr. Strassman just rejected his Eastern mysticism, his Buddhist worldview, but rather than going back to the Bible on which he was raised, going back to Torah, and the Tanakh, he wrote a follow-up book in which he postulated that the Hebrew prophets had dosed themselves with something like DMT, and that's how they were getting their prophetic visions. And so we needed to do more experimentation with DMT to figure out how Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel got all these really cool visions. It's like, that's not really the message that's in the Bible there. They were invited to these visions, and they were often accompanied by angelic guides, perhaps because of the other entities in this realm that his volunteers were encountering. So,
Derek, have you gotten people telling you, because I've gotten this with my revelation material, responses on posts, a lot of people, not a lot, but enough numbers that makes me go, boy, someone must be reading a common book, and I found out there was a book, making references to claiming that, well, John just was on mushrooms. That's where he got the vision was. I heard that from multiple people now. And sure enough, I found out there's some book out there about John's visions by Allegro, who used to be a Dead Sea Scroll scholar. And he got into the whole mushroom thing, and that's what his claim was.
Yeah. Well, I've not read the book, but I've heard some of that. But I think your observation about Hancock and the fact that he's almost there where he's thinking, okay, I've got, his claim is that ayahuasca will grant you insights. He talks about combining this with the guidance of a shaman and talking therapy, which will help you work through problems and resolve issues. He describes, and I wrote this quote down, highly prized visionary effects of DMT. It's like, okay. But again, Dr. Strassman, who did the studies there at New Mexico State, he was convinced that people were seeing into the spirit realm and were seeing entities that were of a spiritual nature that could occupy that realm. This basically made it possible for people to see in that realm. Graham Hancock doesn't seem to be going there. And so I've got to think that for somebody like that, this would be a really frustrating experience. I mean, I'm opening this door, but what am I seeing in there? Is it just my imagination helping me work through things? And if that's the case, then what's the point? Where's the transcendent aspect of it?
Right. Well, you want to force him to think further beyond, but I think he's only at the point where apparently the experiences are truly traumatically deep. And so when you're a materialist and you have this pseudo transcendence experience with drugs, it doesn't surprise me that that's enough at the moment. It's like, that's it. That's the transcendence I'm looking for. But you're right, to be rigorously rational, you have to say, Well, yeah, but it's just an experience based on drugs. So it still is nothing. It's just experience. It doesn't mean anything, you know? So where's this transcendence that you're reaching for? You're not going to find it there ultimately.
Yeah. So that is the question then. If he is correct, and I'm okay with the idea of there being a pre-flood civilization, since the Bible tells us there was one, where does he think that civilization came from? I don't recall him saying in this series or in the previous series where he thought that civilization came from. He doesn't do the ancient aliens thing. He's not, doesn't seem to be putting forward a supernatural worldview. So,
what about in that book, Doug? Does he go into the
I
in the
can't
book?
recall that he ever does. I mean, he's kind of one of these guys that's willing to admit that humanity might be millions of years old, but he doesn't really give an explanation for why there should be this sudden rise in culture and technology and this kind of stuff around the end of the Ice Age. It's kind of like it's there. And so I want to prove to everybody that it's there, which I think is a great quest. But then he doesn't have anything that goes beyond that. And especially in rejecting the biblical worldview that we are all very familiar with Genesis 6, like where is there to go from that?
well, I guess the one thing we need to do is pray for Graham Hancock, because if he were able to make that connection and suddenly plug into that, it would be like suddenly supercharging his research at that point. Not everything that was built, for example, in Peru, because he spent some time at Cusco and Sacsayhuaman, which is just some really remarkable architecture. Of course, the official story is that it was the Incans in the 15th century who built Sacsayhuaman, which is just amazing. What is it, like at 12,000 feet above sea level, or some ridiculous height where you don't really want to spend a lot of time there because you're not getting enough oxygen. And yet they managed this.
Well, unless you live in Colorado your whole life, then you're already kind of acclimated to that.
To be fair, yeah.
Us lowlanders from Chicago, that's not no. But he doesn't want to accept that story. Okay, I get it. And when you go through the walls of Cusco, our friend Timothy Alberino's gone through there. L.A. Marzulli has done the same and shown the incredible architecture in these stones that almost appear as though they were molded, partially melted, and fit into place when they were semi-soft. Okay, fine. But again, where did that technology come from? If the Ice Age was so devastating, where did that civilization exist? And I think we talked about this in our previous program, because the Ice Age, while it extended quite far down in the northern hemisphere, it didn't really affect the southern hemisphere all that much. So why, where was this civilization that everything had to be destroyed, unless you're going to posit a global flood?
You guys had brought up in the chat something that we haven't talked about that I think is worth bringing up right here, which is that it's not just that he doesn't really have an explanation for where did this thing come from. It's that he assumes that this culture was really, really good. And then he starts assuming things like, oh, the Incan culture, it was just so good. I mean, all the things that they did were so wonderful. And even in the 5th episode, it's just...
And those Mayans.
Exactly. There's a passing comment that you wouldn't even catch it, but he basically just kind of talks about, and human sacrifice, kind of ha, ha, ha. And I'm just like, what did he just say? He's talking about human sacrificing human beings. And it reminds me of a show that I was watching on PBS several years ago. There was a mummy that they discovered on one of the highest peaks down in the Andes. Her name is Juanita. And I don't know if you've ever seen this show, but this is a PBS show, and these guys are talking about this, and they're just using the most flowery language for this child that they murdered in a sacrifice. And it's like, what in the world is going on in somebody's head that makes you think that this is a good thing? And I think about another propaganda movie which Mel Gibson made, Apocalypto, which very well shows what this kind of culture was actually doing as the heads were just rolling off the tops of these ziggurats in order to prevent the end of the world or whatever it was. And it's like, none of that. No, we're just assuming that these were the greatest cultures ever. We need to return to what they were doing. And there's no critical thinking whatsoever about this. Maybe God destroyed these people for a reason.
Well, that's a really, really good point.
Yeah,
Because we shared some notes before the recording because in watching this and thinking Chaco Canyon, this is ringing a bell for me, and I remembered that some years back when the late Tom Horn was writing the book Lost World of the Cloud Eaters about the Four Corners region and the culture there. His daughter Allie Cole now. Had done some of the research for Tom and had found a book written by an archaeologist. The book is titled Man-Corn. I don't remember the name of the archaeologist who wrote it, but Man-Corn essentially is the English translation of the words in this language to designate people who were being eaten like corn. Corn is sort of a generic term that means food. So Man-Corn, that's what the guy titled the book. And there was an intro to the book that I highlighted because it struck me as like, yes, this does apply to this region. Quote, the regional approach has produced 5 principal findings about cannibalism in the American Southwest. And to be clear, Graham Hancock spent a lot of time in that Four Corners region, New Mexico, Chaco Canyon, talking about how the 18.6-year cycle of the moon's movement from, across the sky is encoded in where they built their buildings and the kivas, the great houses where they would have these underground chambers representing the places where they came up out of the earth after the end of the third world to begin the fourth world. Cannibalism can be different. Here are 5 principal findings. Number 1, cannibalism can be differentiated from all other forms of bone damage and mortuary practice by a distinctive signature, which matches that seen in the bone refuse of large and small game animals. In other words, saying we didn't confuse just random human remains with people who'd been butchered. You can tell what that looks like in the bones. Point number 2. Cannibalism was practiced for almost 4 centuries, beginning at about AD 900. It was most common in the Four Corners area, especially among people living in Chaco Canyon and in or near outlying Chacoan great houses. These very very buildings that Graham Hancock spent so much time on as the location where their rituals took place. Point number 3, southwestern cannibalism appears to have originated in Mexico, where the practice was common and dates back at least 2,500 years. In other words, the Maya and the Inca for 2,500 years. This went on. Point 4, social control, social pathology, and some manner of ritual sacrifice, probably in that order of weighting, are provisionally the best combination of explanatory factors. And point 5, although reports of prehistoric southwestern violence and cannibalism have been published since the beginning of the 20th century, they have been largely ignored. End quote.
See, that's part of the issue. One of the archaeologists that I studied under in grad school was a Mayanist, and he was a great archaeologist, great scholar, but he was towing the party line when it came to this sort of thing. It's this sort of commodification of culture, and they sacrificed humans, but that was an integral part of their culture.
That's exactly what the PBS show did. Exactly, Judge.
Yes, exactly. And in this series, Derek and I were talking about it yesterday. They just completely glance over the fact. You guys have mentioned the human sacrifice that was prevalent in all the Mayan world. There was this sort of harmonic convergence perspective of the Maya that came out of like the 60s and the 70s, when a lot of this stuff was getting, critical review, and there were a lot of new discoveries about the Mayan world. They didn't get along with each other. These city-states warred against one another continually, and they typically didn't kill their captives. They took them prisoners so that they could sacrifice them. And we all got a picture of that, like Doug pointed out, in Apocalypto, as to the manner in which they dispatched these people. Yeah. They literally butchered themselves out of civilization. That's a big contributor. So there's a quantifiable consequence as well as a moral consequence to what happens when you engage in these sorts of activities. Of course, that got no coverage in the series either. But if I could make a second point to illustrate what the author of Man-Corn is saying, the lines of communication between these regions of North America is also very clearly illustrated and has been for quite some time. We know that there's exchange of all kinds of information, including religious information, ritual information that's taking place between the Puebloans, but not just the Puebloans and the ancient Puebloans in the Four Corners region, but also the Plains villagers in the Texas Panhandle, where I used to live, and Mesoamerica. How do we know this? Well, we find obsidian from Mexico in Puebloan and Plains villager sites, and we find Alabates flint in Puebloan sites and sites in Mexico. And Alabates flint, it's this tiger-striped cream orange kind of red looking flint. It's very distinctive, comes from one place on the planet, and that's the Alabates flint quarry near Borger, Texas, in the Texas Panhandle. So these ideas about ritual consumption of human flesh circulated quite far abroad, if we're using Mesoamerica as a kind of jumping off point for those kinds of ideas. But again, that sort of contextualization does not come across at all, as you've all pointed out in the series. He just sort of glibly references this stuff,
and he
I
doesn't
think it's
mention
worth
it.
Pointing out that that the Israelite take on this in the Book of Enoch is very much worth listening to with regard to this, because in the chapter before what I had been reading, there's a kind of a summary statement, and this is like spot on Genesis 6:4, but it says that these guys taught them magical medicine, incantations, cutting roots, taught them about plants, that kind of stuff that we've already talked about. But then it goes immediately on to talk about the giants that are produced, and then they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and flesh, and their flesh was devoured by one another, and they drank the blood, and the earth brought an accusation against the oppressors. Then it goes straight into chapter 8, and Azazel taught the people the art of making swords and knives and shields and breastplates, on and on and on it goes. That's the context into which the teaching of humanity, these things, is found in Enoch. And it seems to me that if Graham really is onto something with the ayahuasca stuff being kind of a key to how this civilization became what it was, and I actually don't dispute that. But the thing is, these entities could still be around, and they could be the same ones that were causing this kind of trouble, all that back then. And are we really going to think that all of a sudden they've changed the modus operandi and how they're going to, what they're going to lead us, humanity, into? And it's like there's no sense of any of that in what Graham has ever written. And it's because he's just completely rejecting the Judeo-Christian worldview on this.
Yeah. The Judeo-Christian interpretation of the book of First Enoch is that when those giants were destroyed in the flood of Noah, their spirits became demons and are still with us. And we are warned even in the New Testament against following doctrines of demons. And that is likely who these people on these ayahuasca or DMT trips are encountering when they go into that spirit realm. What's really interesting is that these culture heroes that he talks about, and I think he really raises a very interesting and important point when he connects, say, Oannes in Mesopotamia, who brought the secrets of civilization to humanity, and Viracocha and Kukulkan, and the other stories from around the world, even the Vedic culture of ancient India, of 7 sages who came from the sea to bring the secrets of civilization, the people who came from the sea and landed at Rapa Nui, Easter Island, bringing with them the secrets of civilization. This is a common thread that goes back to the story of the Apkallu, which means, roughly translated from the Sumerian, big water man, who were sent forth from the Abzu, the abyss, by the clever god Enki with the secrets of civilization for humanity. But as you point out there, you raise the question, is like, look, at some point, if we're going to say that, yes, Viracocha and Quetzalcoatl and these sages brought all of these wonderful gifts of civilization, how to build these fantastic architectural megaliths that have survived for millennia, did they also teach him to eat people? Because they were eating people.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, well, again, God bless Graham Hancock for asking the right questions. We just pray that he starts considering that there may be some answers outside of what he has considered thus far. Bringing Keanu Reeves into this season as he brought Joe Rogan into season number 1 to bring some star power in. Interesting, doesn't really contribute to the narrative, but it does lend some credence to it. Oh, he's famous. I know him. He was in, and
Keanu Reeves is one of the coolest guys in Hollywood anyway.
Yeah.
In a world that Hollywood is just a completely degenerate, corrupted world, but he's one of the few who's actually a good guy.
Yes. So that does not hurt Graham Hancock in the telling of his story. So I guess from where I'm coming from, and I'd encourage you guys to share your final thoughts here, I would encourage people to watch this series, watch season 1, watch season 2, but just bear in mind that there's that gaping hole, that big piece of the puzzle he refuses to try to see if it fits into his worldview, which is the biblical narrative.
And my last statement would just be, and look up some of the YouTube archaeologists who are criticizing it. And you don't have to, accept everything they're saying either, because of their worldview. But we need to educate ourselves more than we do. And I think that's what the key is for me.
Any final thoughts, Doug?
I would just say that Graham has been incredibly influential in my life. Just the things that I've read from him over the 25 years, and I owe a lot to him in the way that I think about the world. And I would highly recommend people read just about anything that he's ever written, with the caveat of what we're talking about here. Because if you don't read him with a critical eye, then you become like just kind of a fanboy of Graham, kind of like Keanu was at the end of the show, just kind of goo goo gaga over Graham because, you're overthrowing everything that we've ever learned about these cultures. And it's like, okay, but, so.
Judd, you're the resident archaeologist. Final thoughts.
I read Graham's book, Fingerprints of the Gods, when I was a sophomore in college. It was right after it had come out, and have read just about everything that he's written. And I knew reading his book was sort of a fulcrum for me and my perspective on history, because as we've observed tonight, we come from the old paradigm, where Mesopotamia and Egypt and the Indus River Valley civilizations were the oldest, but now we're finding out that that's really not the case. They weren't the first sophisticated civilizations by a number of millennia. But that line of questioning for me really begins with Hancock's work. But again, I would echo what you've all said tonight, that it's a good idea to read Hancock's work, because it's a much needed counterbalance to the mainstream academic narrative. It's easy to get, for both parties really, to get myopic about things, and so that's why I've always said we need both perspectives. Just like Brian was pointing out, watch some of these archaeologists on YouTube that are critical. Milo Rossi is the guy you were thinking about, I think, Brian, Mini Minute Man. And he's actually kind of entertaining too. He's pretty funny.
And he's sarcastic and stuff, but you can see through it because he knows his stuff. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, he actually does have field experience. And so, that's something else we need to keep in mind. Whatever you think about the field archaeologists that are actually doing the work in the field, it's because of them that we actually know any of this stuff to begin with, right. to be able to interpret it, through whatever hermeneutical lens, we want to look at it. Get a balance of perspectives, but always, we're looking at it through the lens of the Bible. Look at it, let that be your critical tool when you're reviewing something like Ancient Apocalypse.
Amen. Dr. Judd Burton, Doug Van Dorn, Brian Godawa. Check the show notes below this video or audio, wherever you're watching or listening, and you'll find links to their websites. Gentlemen, may you have a Merry Christmas. May 2025 be blessed for you and your families, and we look forward to continuing Iron and Myth in the new year. If you haven't signed up yet for the Branson Christmas Prophecy Conference, which was actually 2 weekends ago, it's actually not too late. I'll tell you about that. Hint at something I can't tell you about yet, coming in 2025. And, have you heard about the debate between Gaia TV star Billy Carson and Christian apologist Wes Huff? If you haven't, I will summarize it for you briefly straight ahead. It's something Billy Carson wishes he had never agreed to. That is ahead as A View from the Bunker continues.
The 10 plagues of Moses and the Exodus were judgment upon the gods of Egypt, because those gods were demonic reality. Chronicles of the Watchers is a series of biblical novels by best-selling author Brian Godawa, charting the influence of spiritual warfare on human history. The War of Gods and Men. A must-read, Moses Against the Gods of Egypt and Other Supernatural Historical Novels in the series Chronicles of the Watchers. Available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook at Amazon.com. That's Chronicles of the Watchers by Brian Godawa at Amazon.com.
For December, we're offering every DVD in our online store for just $10. That's right, $10 for any DVD in our store. That includes collections of our teachings like This is War and Unmasking the Ancient Gods, The Four Horsemen, where we identify the fallen angels who ride in Revelation chapter 6, our travelogumentaries of our trips to Israel, Wars of the Gods Volume 1, Search for the Titans, and Wars of the Gods Volume 2, Search for the Rephaim, What Lies Beneath, a jaw-dropping discussion with Dr. Aaron Judkins about the influence of the fallen watchers on Göbekli Tepe, the Best of Sci Friday Volumes 1 and 2, and the 13-part video teaching series based on the book The Second Coming of Saturn. We'll even include The Unseen Adversary, an MP3 CD with 7 hours of audio interviews with Bible scholar Dr. Michael S. Heiser. Every DVD in our store, just $10 plus shipping and handling during December, only at gilberthouse.org/store. Talking the walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online at vftb.net. That is our web hub, but our main web hangout is gilberthouse.org. That's where Sharon and I link all of our stuff. Gilberthouse.org, also DerekPGilbert.com. You'll find us on social media, Twitter, or formerly Twitter, now X, at View from Bunker, at Derek Gilbert, and at GilbertHouse_TV, other places as well. Hey, by the way, we also now have a channel on Telegram. Yes, Telegram. Find us there at View from the Bunker. Post a lot of news articles there and other stuff, and you can follow us there as well to just keep up with what's going on in the world. YouTube, of course, we are at Gilbert House. Please subscribe, share, click that bell for notifications, hit the like button, and then if you are so inclined to make sure we never get canceled, download our free mobile app to your smartphone or tablet. It's available for free, and it's available for iOS, Android, and Amazon Kindle Fire phones and tablets. It's also available for Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire TV. So if you got a Fire Stick, a Roku, if you got a smart TV with Roku or Fire TV preloaded, just make sure you've got the Gilbert House app loaded onto your set-top box, and that way all of our stuff comes right to your big screen. The app itself for the mobile devices has some additional features, including a Bible, audio Bible with multiple translations, a calendar of our upcoming events. It's also got a community module. Up in the right-hand corner, you'll see a couple of little talk balloons, and when you click on that, you basically can join communities to talk about these programs, talk about Sharon's new podcast, The Armored Sheep. Have you watched that yet? She does a wonderful job. I'm really proud of Sharon and what 10 episodes out there already. So please check that out. And of course, all of our other programs, which we will resume programming in January. It's been a little nice to have a bit of a break following my surgery for the abdominal aneurysm back in November. Frankly, all things considered, that was really the least disruptive as far as life goes. I'm still under orders from the doctor not to lift anything heavier than about 10 pounds until the end of the month. But he has said that the surgery itself appears to have been so successful, I don't need to go back for a follow-up visit or a follow-up CT scan until the end of next year. And post-op in the hospital, they were telling me, yes, you'll have a post-op CT scan the first week of December and a visit with the vascular surgeon. And then a month after that, we'll do an ultrasound. And then 3 months later, and then 3 months later, more ultrasounds to check to make sure that the stent that was inserted to seal off the aneurysm was healing correctly. And apparently the CT scan showed so well. And, Dr. Cole showed it to me. So I was able to, okay, this is the before, this is the after. The aneurysms are shrinking. Praise God. Now I'm still dealing with some foot neuropathy. I've got what is referred to as drop foot. Literally, when I walk, it feels like I'm walking in scuba flippers. And because I don't have the muscle control over my feet that I used to, I've got some balance issues. So I'm walking with a cane. No loss of muscle mass or anything like that. It's just, a balance issue. I don't want to fall over, especially now being on blood thinners. But I will take the balance issues, which are apparently completely unconnected, the foot neuropathy, the partial numbness, unconnected whatsoever from the aneurysm, and I will be thankful. So we'll see if we can deal with this in the new year. But if it means I got to use a walking stick for the rest of my days, I'll take it, because what got fixed was one of those things that they refer to as a silent killer, because most often people don't even know they've got an aneurysm until it goes, and then it's dangerous. So again, I'll take the cane and I'll be thankful. And as Ryan Pitterson said, hey man, just rock the look, put on a fedora, use the cane, and it'll look cool. So that's you see me wearing a fedora in the months ahead. That's why. Ryan Pitterson, thank you for the suggestion. A few weeks back, a Christian apologist named Wesley Huff, he's in Toronto. I had been unfamiliar with him, and this debate that he did with Billy Carson kind of crossed my radar just on social media feeds, people saying, did you see what happened? And I had not, and again, I was not familiar with Wes Huff. I should have been, because he's a brilliant young man. New Testament scholar, an expert in Greek and Coptic texts of the New Testament period, really knows his stuff. Billy Carson, we've seen on Gaia TV from time to time. We have a subscription to it. We log in every now and then when we're bored and watch just to see what kind of propaganda, Gnostic propaganda, is being put out there. Billy Carson is kind of one of the go-to guys that shows up there, like Eric Von Daniken, Giorgio Tsoukalos, and other guys like that, who have a worldview that is not Christian and make claims about Christianity in the course of their work that goes unchallenged on Gaia TV, because they're presenting a neo-Gnostic worldview based on the idea that if there is a God, it's sort of a collective, very Eastern very Eastern in its presentation. Well, Wes was invited to participate in a discussion with Billy Carson by a podcast host who apparently is a friend of Carson's, because they were in studio together, and Wes connected in via the internet from Toronto. It's about a 3-hour debate, 2 hours and 45 minutes altogether. I've just now watched the first 45 minutes, but I've seen some reaction videos to it. And it did not go well for Billy Carson. He has been making claims about the truth claims of the Bible, specifically that the oldest copy of the Bible, the Codex Sinaiticus, which he refers to as the Sinai Bible, doesn't depict Jesus being crucified. And that happens not to be the case. The Codex Sinaiticus is the oldest, say, Genesis to Revelation copy that we know about. It's from the 4th century. It's a Greek manuscript. But there are older copies of the Gospels going back to the 2nd century. And there are citations of New Testament scripture in the writings of the early church fathers that predate, say, the Council of Nicaea, where if you wanted to, you could reconstruct the entire New Testament minus about 15 verses just from the writings of the early church theologians, early church fathers. So Carson has been able to make this claim because generally when he's interviewed, he's not interviewed by somebody who has really looked deeply into the Bible or biblical texts. Wes knows this stuff and obviously knows it cold. I've started following his channel because I'm learning things from his areas of expertise that I did not know. So, and the way Wes did it, and he deserves praise for this because he was gracious. He gave Billy time to explain his position, to explain where he got the information from which he was making the claims, and Wes countered that and was able to show, quite frankly, that Billy was just absolutely wrong. Billy also referred to a document called the Gospel of Barnabas, which is not to be confused with the Epistle of Barnabas, which is a 2nd century text, not in the Bible, but it's dated to the early church. The Gospel of Barnabas is a forgery from the 14th century. It's in Spanish and it's Italian. It actually quotes from Dante's Inferno. Dante Alighieri, who wrote an epic poem about a visit through hell in the year 1314. So this is a medieval forgery that Billy was referring to, clearly unaware that it was not a legitimate text. And then something else called the Gospel of Jesus' Wife, which is a rather infamous forgery that really damaged the career of a scholar at Harvard who really staked her reputation on it. Somebody got an ancient piece of papyrus and then copied onto the papyrus. So the papyrus looked legit, but it was pointed out that whoever copied the fragment, which purported to be the Gospel of Jesus' Wife, made some scribal errors. In other words, they copied errors in the text that they found online from which they were copying, and they copied those same mistakes, which allowed other textual experts, pepperologists and so forth, to look at it and say, no, this is fake. So he really undermined Billy's case. And it goes on from there. Billy was repeating some of Zecharia Sitchin's material that a planet called Nemesis, formerly called Nibiru, cycles through the solar system on a regular basis. That was thoroughly debunked by Dr. Michael Heiser before his passing. You can look up his website on this, which is still online, sitchiniswrong.com, sitchiniswrong.com. Nibiru is actually just one of the ways of transliterating the name of the ancient Sumerian city called Nippur, Nippur, where the gods of ancient Mesopotamia were believed to meet on an annual basis to decree the feats of the land. They would meet at the temple of Enlil, who was the father of the Mesopotamian gods. And either Zecharia Sitchin, the author of the book The 12th Planet, didn't read Sumerian, or he didn't understand what he was reading, or he did read Sumerian and was just making things up. And again, Mike went into all of this. It's still online for you to reference at sitchiniswrong.com. There are other things, but this is basically how the debate went. Wes was clearly in his element, but again, he was very gracious. He didn't mock or belittle Billy Carson. And sadly for Billy, after the debate was over, he chose to do a live YouTube stream, about a 3-hour live stream, in which he refused to mention the names of Wes, the moderator of the debate, or someone else who was involved in putting things together, choosing instead to refer to them as defendant number 1, defendant number 2, and defendant number 3, because he is threatening all of them with lawsuits. He agreed to sit down and participate in this event, and because he was, embarrassed by his performance, he has threatened to sue the other men involved. I mean, he went so over the top, and I've watched a good chunk of the 3-hour follow-up video that Billy Carson recorded, and he does not come across well. He comes across as a braggart and does not serve his own interests well. His he would have done more to recoup his goodwill with his followers, really, because a lot of his followers were turned off by this based on the comments to his video. He could have recouped a lot of goodwill just by saying, look, I was unprepared. I will learn from this and go forward. I mean, nobody's saying, hey, you've got to become a Christian now because you were schooled by Wes Huff. But for him to go to this extent and even admit during the video that he doesn't even care if he wins the lawsuit, he just wants to make Wes and the other men involved in the debate lose a lot of money, spend a lot of money on lawyers and court fees. So that does not speak well as to your motives for what you're trying to do. So if you do a search for this on YouTube, you can easily find it. Again, Billy Carson, Wes Huff debate, and plenty of reaction videos out there. But it was really a masterclass by Wes Huff, and kudos to you, young man. I'm going to reach out to him in the new year and try to get him on this program, even though his videos are getting a lot more traction than mine are these days, but that's all right, because what he's doing in showing that we as Christians are not following a faith blindly is key. Sharon and I try to do that. We've got one approach, but we are not expert in the areas Wes Huff is an expert in, and I just wanted to bring this to you. If you've not seen it, it is really, again, it's a masterclass in how to approach this. He wasn't angry. He wasn't disrespectful. He wasn't demeaning or condescending in any way to Billy Carson. And Carson, sadly, has not served himself well by what he's chosen to do since that debate. So coming up in the new year, we got some things that, oh, by the way, I was going to tell you that even if you have not yet signed up for the already past conferences, two of them actually, Skywatch TV's Defender Virtual Conference, The Resurrection War, which includes some very important presentations. Dr. Mike Spalding's talk on the resurrection of Israel and the biblical evidence showing that the emergence of Israel as an independent state in 1948 is in fact the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. My talk on the secret history of Israel, which we are actually turning into I don't know if we call it a documentary or a talkumentary, but trying to present the story of what happened behind the scenes, because there are claims out there that there is a secret history to the formation of modern Israel, and it involves all these nefarious characters, and that this is a Luciferian state that we as Christians cannot support. There is a secret history involved, but it's because the men who were involved in it wanted to prevent Israel from becoming a reality, and then they tried to crush Israel after its emergence. So just two of the many presentations, more than 24 available at Skywatch TV's Defender Virtual Conference. You can still sign up for 90 days access. Good way to spend some of your free time during the holidays at defenderconference.com, defenderconference.com. You can also sign up for the Christmas in Branson Prophecy Conference, even though that was 2 weekends ago, because streaming video. And this has got 49 presentations in it with the likes of Rabbi Jonathan Cahn, L.A. Marzulli, Gary Stearman, Bill Salas, Ken Johnson, many others, Mondo Gonzalez. I was honored to participate and present two talks. One of them is on the secret history of Israel, but it's a much shorter version of the one that's available at the Skywatch TV virtual conference. I had a 45-minute time slot, so I took a 2-minute or 2-hour talk and shaved it down to 45 minutes. But you'll get the gist of it there as well. Plus, the other presentations. Got a chance to meet Patrick M. Wood, the author of Technocracy Rising, and a brand new book on technocracy that we're going to read over the holidays as well. This is all available to you right now. BransonChristmasProphecyConference.com. The link is right there on the front page. BransonChristmasProphecyConference.com. There is an event coming up late summer that I can't tell you about yet, but we will be talking about it early in the new year, I'm sure. But this is something that you want to be a part of for sure, and we are looking forward to telling you about that. Our Israel tour, scheduled for October 19th through 30th of 2025. We are still looking forward to having Doug Van Dorn and Dr. Judd Burton join us, Timothy Alberino as well. Obviously, what's happening over there is in flux as Israel's war continues, But it's not on the scale as it was even just a few months ago with the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's rule in Syria. The conduits for shipping weapons from Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon have been cut because the new Sunni rebels who control Damascus and control the central part of the country have no desire to help Hezbollah, who are Shia, or Iran, which is ruled by Shias. The Sunnis and the Shias do not get along. A lot of Sunnis in Syria were very happy to see Assad go because of his support for Hezbollah and the support that Hezbollah gave the Assad regime. So we're praying that things will be much calmer there, and by the time October rolls around. But that is our plan. If you're interested in reserving a place, you can do that by putting down a deposit. You can do this at gilberthouse.org/travel. There's a link there to Lipkin Tours website. If the dates have to change again because the security situation isn't stable and the new dates do not work for you, Lipkin Tours understands this, and they will not hold you accountable for that deposit. So again, gilberthouse.org/travel for more information and a place to reserve your spot there. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to watch or listen. We're looking forward to coming back in the new year. We've already got a topic for Iron and Myth in January. We'll be talking about the cult of the dead around ancient Israel. And if you got a spare moment, if you could leave us a review at Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, wherever fine podcasts are sold. And give us a thumbs up, a like on our Facebook page, the View from the Bunker page on Facebook. Our announcer, the inimitable DC Good, and A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, not commercial, no derivatives 4.0 international license. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. Merry Christmas again, Oliver, wherever you are, and to you. Have a blessed and safe holiday season, and we'll see you again in the new year. Until then, I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.